Among the many heroes of the Western esoteric tradition, whose work still echoes off the choppy waves of the Mediterranean, there are some who graft such an original mark on the collective sculpture of the great work that it behooves us to crack our knuckles, slide open their leather-bound pages, and fulfill their dreams long dead to history. One such philosopher was Synesius, born in the Greek colony of Cyrene on the northern coast of Libya around 373 AD. Of Spartan descent and born to a wealthy family with apparent ties to the city's founders, Synesius would live to praise freedom of speech in the face of tyranny, embrace a direct spirituality of nature and her universal visions and initiations. Synesius was a man among men, a leader and a hunter who organized the defenses of his homeland against barbarian incursions and took up Stoic masculinity, Neoplatonic theology, and accepted the Christian office of Bishop of Ptolemais without foregoing his beliefs in reincarnation, the pre-existence of the soul in its pneumatic vehicle, and without renouncing his marriage. 50 years before Synesius's birth, Emperor Constantine presided over the First Council of Nicaea after founding the new capital of the Roman Empire and facilitating the separation of East and West. The Arian controversy resulted in a more solidified and abstract Christology and created a new basis for other self-proclaimed Christians to be deemed heretics for not following the state-approved dogmas, later expressed in the same Nicene Creed that was reaffirmed by Emperor Theodosius in 380 when his Edict of Thessalonica established Nicene Christianity as the state religion of the empire. By the time Emperor Theodosius died in 395, political disorder and the risks posed by foreign migrants coming into Roman provinces and wealthy barbarians becoming too close with Roman leaders was amplified, especially during periods of gross corruption and decadence. Around the time of Synesius's birth, the migrations and conquests of the Huns pressed many foreign peoples and tribes into Roman provinces, where vibrant colors of religious syncretism had already mixed across the Mediterranean, especially in Alexandria. Philosophers in this period were not only dealing with the nascent structure of a relatively new religious worldview, but they could look back on apparently nobler times, apparently more wise philosophers than those offered in the present day. But at this stage, Christianity did not survive by cutting off every potentially heretical thinker and variant theologian, but rather by absorbing religious elements from the regions, people, and particular traditions it spread to, resulting in numerous examples of Christians whose Christianity was quite complex and particular to the individual. Take, for instance, the quote from Emperor Hadrian, referring to Christians in Egypt around 134 AD, quote, "There those who worship Serapis are in fact Christians, and those who call themselves bishops of Christ are in fact devotees of Serapis. There is no chief of the Jewish synagogue, no Samaritan, no Christian presbyter, who is not an astrologer, a soothsayer, or an anointer." As we will see, Synesius was a man living in a later and pivotal edge of imperial Christianization, who gradually finds himself immersed in a world of political corruption and tedious dogmatism, longing nonetheless to return to his country life of philosophic leisure and contemplation. Synesius has been seen to embody the complex type of Christianity that comes about when an educated and ambitious original thinker is already finely tuned by Neoplatonism, mythic poetry, Stoic morality, and that esoteric wisdom found in the so-called Chaldean oracles. But let us remove ourselves from the pitfalls of generalized, grand narratives and come to Synesius's boyhood in Cyrene, a region of fertile beauty and commercial accessibility, with a rich valley land and centuries of Greek colonization behind it. Cyrene had been where Socrates' pupil Aristippus founded a school of philosophy and taught that pleasure is the chief aim of life, but that pleasure must also never become the master of a man. Cyrene and its nearby cities and port, called the Libyan Pentapolis, came under Roman power in 95 BC and became a province in 78. Cyrene and its Dorian founders long in the past were the same Spartans Synesius claimed descent from. Cyrene in Synesius's time was not a place of major imperial events, and although it did not have Huns and Goths to deal with, it had to fend off its own barbarians and forces of nature unique to the Libyan region, ranging from locust swarms and plagues to earthquakes. Among those forces at times seen to be set against Cyrene were of course the tyrannical practices of Roman officials, for it should be remembered that for a Roman provincial to govern in Cyrene, this official should have very few if any ties to the area, so that they could more readily serve the empire without deference to the locality. Not much is known of Synesius's parents, but he had a brother and a sister. His sister married one Theodosius, who was a member of the Byzantine court. His younger brother Euoptius was a close friend throughout his life, and their letter exchanges offer much of what we know of Synesius's personal life. Around 393 AD, the brothers traveled by ship to Alexandria for their education, a city whose Neoplatonic school at the time was presided over by a woman, the brilliant mathematician and philosopher Hypatia. Synesius's eventual attachment to Hypatia and praise for her as the philosopher cannot be understated. He sent her a number of books to review before publication. His love for her was a romance of admiration and utmost respect, as he called her mother, sister, teacher, and she was very much his elder. And although Hypatia died brutally at the hands of a Christian mob who tore her apart in 415, in this Alexandria Christians and pagans lived together mostly in harmony and friendly commerce, capable of arguing about philosophy in one moment and sharing a meal in the next. But when we encounter Synesius developed into his years as a man of means, and of a historically romantic patriotism with a profound love for his homeland, we encounter a man attached to his Greek descent, who loved to hunt, saddle his horse, and contemplate nature from deep within her solitary tranquility. As he writes, quote, "From childhood, leisure and comfort in life have ever appeared to me a divine blessing which someone has said befits divine natures, and this is naught else but the culture of the intellect, and its reconciliation with God on the part of the man who possesses that leisure and profits by it. And when I came to a man's estate, I had changed in nothing from my boyhood's love of a quiet life, but passing my days as if in a sacred festival, I strove throughout all my life to preserve a state of spirit gentle and untroubled by storms. And yet the storms did come, for on Synesius's return journey by ship to Cyrene, he endured a calamitous voyage, whose dangers were amplified when the Jewish captain of the vessel not only unwisely sailed into open tumultuous seas, but refused to take hold of the rudder or work with his hands during his Sabbath. The storm winds eventually snapped the sail yard and nearly killed Synesius and many of the crew, but the ship ran aground on a reef, and the crew was eventually able to disperse among a number of smaller vessels to safety. And following his return to Cyrene, a storm of another sort confronted him, those barbed opportunities of the civilized world that encroach upon a countryman's peace, but nonetheless provoke him to erect himself before the thrones of power and vent the grievances of his homeland, and offer up lessons in philosophy to tyrants who so often forget about their provinces amid the lure of heavily adorned palace chambers with foreign sycophants eager for a bribing. For Synesius was appointed an ambassador of Cyrene, and charged by the Senate of Cyrene and the Pentapolis with bringing the grievances of his city to Emperor Arcadius in Constantinople, sometime around 399, while Synesius was in his late 20s. The exact circumstances behind this eventual 3-year journey in the capital are not entirely known, but it certainly involved a remission of taxes, and Synesius's oration, given before the emperor and his court, after being stalled out for years, hits upon a number of issues that speak for themselves. Of this time spent in the capital, Synesius later wrote, quote, "My life has been one of books and of the chase. Except what time I spent as an ambassador, would that I had not been compelled to see 3 unspeakable years lost to my life. But even in them I derived the greatest profit from divination, and that on many occasions. For plots directed against me it made ineffective, plots of ghost-raising sorcerers. It exposed these to me, saved me from them all, and helped me in the management of public office in the best interest of the cities, and it finally placed me, more undaunted than was ever any Greek, on terms of intimacy with the emperor." Not only did Synesius divine through dreams with practical advantage, but he protested the allowance of militant foreigners into Roman cities with fortuitous timing. Perhaps the most catastrophic example of a foreign militant causing major disturbance in Byzantium during Synesius's life was when the Gothic leader GYRENE was allowed to settle in Thrace, and later bring Gothic soldiers into Constantinople, in an affair that saw the capital ruled over by foreigners, Roman officials executed, and later resulted in thousands dying in the city in a riot that eventually forced GYRENE to flee. After GYRENE was caught by the Huns, his head was returned to Constantinople as a gift for Emperor Arcadius. It was either in anticipation of these events, during them or soon afterward, that Synesius's oration on imperial rule finally found its audience. During his period of waiting, however, Synesius also wrote the first part on Providence, which is also an exploration of the ideal and despicable government through a fabulous narrative of Osiris and Typhon, who have been seen to represent Aurelianus and GYRENE respectively. Synesius presents through his oration both an ideal monarch and a contemptible tyrant, describing their conduct and alluding to their policies. For Synesius warns his audience that his words may be as salt, bitter to the taste, but preserving against corruption. But here he has the unique opportunity of conveying the character of a philosopher king to the sitting emperor. Quote, "I say that with God's guidance, the king ought first to be king of himself, and to establish a monarchy in his soul. He that disposes himself for the manifest good of the governed, and is willing to suffer, that there may be no suffering for them, and to encounter danger, that they may live without fear, and to keep night vigils, and to sup with cares at his board, that day and night they may have rest from anxieties. This is a shepherd amidst his sheep, a king amongst men." A king is naturally disturbed in his sleep, for all the burdens of government and the suffering of his people should be a constant reminder to him. Therefore he should cultivate a divine calmness and stoic dignity, learning to remain graceful and unruffled by 10,000 stresses, quote, "setting mind to dominate the beast that dwells with us." In his On Providence, Synesius depicts Osiris as wholly departed from selfish cares, with unsleeping service to the needs of others, incessant thoughts as to what more he may do to support his people on their terms. But for the ruler who is ashamed to confess where they've gone wrong and finds no value in repentance, he is deserving of punishment, for he gains nothing from offered knowledge or healing words. Thus Typhon and the tyrant are predisposed to crooked desires of foreigners over the righteous needs of the public. He who would fawn over a sack of coins and a trundle of silks, and pass no thought for the tears or injuries of the families in his cities, has never deserved the throne, and cannot pretend that God has anointed him. Quote, "We must, if possible, employ all the weapons in the court for the purpose that flattery may not slip in wearing the mask of friendship, for by this one thing is royalty plundered, however vigilant the guards. For the ideal monarch must become immune to flattery, like the statuary of gods, and must take great pains to surround himself with model friends. Quote, "Now my speech must go on to lead the king from out his palace, and, after his friends, to hand him over to the soldiers, and further to make him descend to the plain, and inspect his men, their arms, and their horses." Synesius harkens back to Plato and Homer to support these points, and recognizes why Cyrus the Great was great indeed. Quote, "But whoso exploits his leadership for luxury's sake, whoso squanders his resources in reveling, esteeming that he must needs gratify all his desires, considering that what makes the subject class suffer is the guerdon of his rule among many, and that the pleasure of his soul is to be served by many, and in a word, he who does not fatten his flock, but himself desires to be fattened by it, that man I call a butcher amongst his cattle, and I declare him to be a tyrant, whenever that which he rules over is a people endowed with reason. It is not the number of subjects that make a king any more than a tyrant." Synesius slams home his point with a rather biting tale, telling of Agesilaus, king of Sparta, who, when meeting in the tent of a former enemy, wore plain soldier's clothes and drank rough wine, quote, "And when a young Athenian scoffed at the hilt of his sword because it was made of a cheap sort of wood and uncarven, he replied, 'When we fight, you will not make trial of the hilt, but I do not think you will be able to find fault with the blade.'" As much as no one is really a philosopher who is always bragging about himself, so too is no man a true king who luxuriates in extravagance, wears many masks before sycophants, and treats wealthy foreigners better than the lowliest of his own people. Synesius was preaching a purging of extravagance and pomposity, not only from within the king, but outwardly in the court and across the empire. For the king is a man, and must be reminded so by dealing with men on the ground, not prancing about the palace in a private orgy of pleasures. For Synesius boldly declares, "You rejoice only in the pleasures of the body, and the most material of these, even as many as touch and taste offer you, and so you live the life of a polyp of the sea." The king who has committed to nothing but himself and his pleasures will make the entire empire vulnerable to the vain flatteries of vampiric foes masquerading as companions. And in perhaps one of the most vivid displays of Synesius's contempt for tyrants, he says, quote, "A dullard becomes a gift for a king, and the duller he be, the greater the gift. These men at once ready to laugh and weep without measure, playing the buffoon with gestures, noises, and every means in their power. These men, I say, aid you to destroy your leisure, and encourage by a greater evil that foggy blindness of mind, which you have contracted from living a life not in accord with nature. The half-baked thoughts and conversation of these men suit your ears better than a philosophical sentiment, clearly and tersely expressed. And however much pleasure you have derived from this amazing inactivity, distrusting the thinking part of your people, and giving yourself solemn airs before them, while bringing the brainless elements close to you and stripping before them, you should clearly understand that each thing increases by arts the same as those by which it is welded together. This conduct is not godly and has not tamed that beast within. And so, while the tyrant may pretend to be better than other men by merit of his rank alone, he is in truth worse than the worst of lesser rank. For being given a greater station in life, where he might effect positive change, he has rolled on his back and lifted up his belly to the swift daggers of lust, luxury, and larceny. One of Synesius's prescriptions was quite simple: keep foreigners out of the military, and especially out of political office. And as for the ruler's acquisition of divine favor, quote, he is ready to reveal himself to that one endowed with a nature to receive him. Much more must be said in the future of Synesius's scathing critique of tyranny in the face of an emperor prone to such behavior. But in the course of the oration, Synesius presents more of his personal philosophy that allows us to transition into matters of the soul and theology. He remarks that, quote, all men everywhere, methinks, celebrate the goodness of God, alike peoples that are wise and people that are foolish. In this at least all agree with one another, and speak with the same voice. However, they may differ in all other respects in their notions of the divine element, and however they divide his pure and indivisible nature with a great variety of opinions. But in sooth, even this undisputed good does not yet disclose to us the throne of God in real existence. Indeed, Synesius was no dullard who pretended that men with varying opinions about God were not in truth dealing with the same underlying forces and mysteries. Synesius also alludes time and again to the mysteries of which he was an initiate, and in his Egyptian tale, he demonstrates his ability to subtly weave greater truths into a fable. For Synesius, in his late 20s now, already admired the twofold form of the Egyptian Hermes, set up by the Egyptians as a symbol of strength and understanding. Quote, "I've always admired that creation of the wise Egyptians, their Hermes. The Egyptians make the face of their deity double, placing a young one next to an old one, requiring thus of anyone who is to keep good guard over them that he be both wise and strong, as the one thing would be useless without the other." The 14th century Byzantine scholar Nicephorus Gregoras would later point to Chaldean and Egyptian commandments as making serious influence on Synesius, and by Egyptian commandments he apparently meant the Corpus Hermeticum. Likewise, the great Neoplatonist and translator Thomas Taylor could not help but notice young Synesius offering a prophecy in his Egyptian tale that resembled the famous Lamentation of Hermes Trismegistus given in the Hermetic treatise Asclepius. For much as in this treatise Synesius wrote in consequence of Typhon's tyrannical rule over Egypt, quote, "But after no great length of time a certain depraved fragment of religion, and an adulteration of divine worship, like that of money as it were, prevailed, which the ancient law exterminated from cities, shutting the doors against impiety and expelling it to a great distance from the walls." In On Providence, writing as if in the point of view of Osiris's divine father, Synesius includes decidedly Egyptian concepts, saying, quote, "My dear Osiris, conceive that it is well for a divine nature to exist, and at the same time not exist in this terrestrial abode, but to be sent into it from another region. On this account souls are rarely good in these realms, though they may be seen in them." Thomas Taylor offers in a footnote an explanation of this passage that explains he is referring to the fact that a divine nature is not present locally on the earth, but is present by its energies and illuminations. This may be the veiled truth behind the mysterious initiation which Osiris's father speaks of, quote, "You have also been initiated in those mysteries in which there are two pair of eyes, and it is requisite that the pair which are beneath should be closed, when the pair that are above them perceive, and that when the pair above are closed, those which are beneath should be opened." As it happened, Synesius did achieve a tax remission for Cyrene through his patron, the Praetorian prefect Aurelianus. Though we do not know the degree of this success or how long it lasted. But when an earthquake rocked Constantinople numerous times during a day, probably in the year 402, Synesius thought it safer to depart the city by ship than remain any longer. He came then to Alexandria once more, where he married a Christian woman in a ceremony provided over by the Bishop Theophilus of Alexandria himself, returning to Cyrene around 405. This return marks the beginning of a possibly tragic stage of Synesius's life. For when he came home, he found his country besieged, the crops burned, the cattle driven away, and the wealth of commoners plundered by the mismanaged and partially barbarian Roman soldiers placed throughout the Pentapolis. The Roman provincial in charge of Cyrene had furnished a ship for himself and set out to sea, managing the conduct of Cyrene's citizens through letters. In one place, Synesius, taking upon himself the efforts of new military defenses, writes, I feel that I am not a master of my grief, but forgive me. I write to you shut up behind ramparts and besieged. Often in an hour I see torches gleaming. I'm lighting some myself and raising them as signals to others. Today we suffer from entire lack of horses. The country is held by the enemy, and I, placed as a sentinel between two towers, am struggling against sleep. He cannot help but blast Cerealis, the would-be general in charge, quote, "May the wretched Cerealis perish wretchedly, if he has not already perished before these my curses. He took very good care not to share in our troubles. Instead of being upon the ramparts like me, Synesius the philosopher, the general keeps himself close to the oar blade." In the intervening years between his return home and his reluctant acceptance of the office of Bishop of Ptolemais, Synesius spent most of his time on a country estate, where he fraternized with the country locals to his great amusement, and enjoyed agriculture, riding, hunting, training with weapons, reading and writing, and time with his wife. He even wrote a book on hunting, which has sadly not survived. He was fond of his leisure and described going into town as a great burden at times, from where he would return with stains of worldliness weighing him down. He thoroughly loved contemplation in nature and books, but detested the idea of focusing too much time on verbal accuracy and the minute details of letters. He didn't like the idea of calling upon dead authors to lend weight to arguments, but rather met them with his original and personal powers. In these years he wrote his famous De Insomniis and Dion, and his second part of On Providence, and a number of letters, poems, and hymns, of which many are decidedly theurgic. These years were interrupted by the occasional local dispute, journeys, or barbarian encroachments, which seemed a chronic and timeless problem. He once visited Athens for a time, but regarded it as a disappointment and barren of its former glory and wisdom. In the year of 410, Synesius was chosen to be the successor to the office of bishop in Ptolemais, where he would represent the church and hold authority across the cities of eastern Libya. And it is here we find one of the most fascinating letters of Synesius's career that offers insight into his ambiguous religious orientation. And yet for him it was not ambiguous at all, for as he expresses, he is firmly Hellenic and Neoplatonic, and will only accept the office of bishop with major concessions on the part of Theophilus. Quote, "If it is possible, I will perform the duties with philosophy, but if it cannot be reconciled with my school of thought and sect, what better could I do than sail straight for illustrious Greece? For if I refuse the priesthood, I can no longer dream of returning to my own city either, unless I am prepared to be the most dishonored and accursed of all men, living amidst a crowd of enemies." In an open letter to the Christian community of the surrounding cities, though addressed to his brother, he lays out his conditions for being bishop. Though he is grateful for being chosen, he is quite perturbed. He did not ask for this, and it would seem to have been forced upon him. He does not even know if he is worthy of the office. In this way, he will accept only insomuch as his true beliefs will not be given up. He understands he will have to publicly preach the Gospels, but is not opposed to this in that he regards them as largely allegorical. And if you should like to be a student of a most interesting place in history, I read these long extracts from one of the most pivotal pieces of evidence you will ever come across regarding this early transitional period into Christian dominance. Quote, "Consider the situation. All my days are divided between study and recreation. In my hours of work, above all when I am occupied with divine matters, I withdraw into myself. In my leisure hours, I give myself up to friends. For you know that when I look up from my books, I like to enter into every sort of sport. I do not share in the political turn of mind, either by nature or in my pursuits. In publishing my thoughts, and in giving myself up entirely to Theophilus's decision, how can I be in the wrong? God himself, the law of the land, and the blessed land of Theophilus himself have given me a wife. I therefore proclaim to all, and call them to witness once for all, that I will not be separated from her, nor shall I associate with her secretly like an adulterer. Now you know that philosophy rejects many of those convictions which are cherished by the common people. For my own part, I can never persuade myself that the soul is of more recent origin than the body, nor would I admit that the world and the parts which make it must perish. This resurrection, which is an object of common belief, is nothing for me but a sacred and mysterious allegory, and I am far from sharing the views of the vulgar crowd thereon. If the laws of the priesthood that obtain with us permit these views to me, I can take over the holy office on condition that I may prosecute philosophy at home and spread legends abroad, and allow men to remain in their already acquired convictions. But if anybody says to me that he must be under this influence, that is, the bishop must belong to the people in his opinions, I will betray myself very quickly. What can there be in common between the ordinary man and philosophy? Divine truth should remain hidden, but the vulgar need a different system. I shall never cease repeating that I think the wise man, to the extent that necessity allows, should not force his opinions upon others, nor allow others to force theirs upon him. No, if I am called to the priesthood, I declare before God and man that I refuse to preach dogmas in which I do not believe. Truth is an attribute of God, and I wish in all things to be blameless before Him. Never will I consent to conceal my beliefs, nor shall my opinions be at war with my tongue. Despite Synesius's unwavering philosophy, Theophilus accepted these terms, and Synesius became bishop of Ptolemais around 410. In these next 3 years, he fathered 3 sons and tragically lost them all over the course of a single year in 413. This crushed him. Synesius's years as a bishop were terrible, worse than even he foresaw. He spent much of his time organizing military defenses, presiding over ecclesiastical or domestic disputes, and decrying Roman military commanders for their crude and plunderous behaviors. All the while, that serene country life of leisure and long rides under the sun and walks in the forest were exchanged for calamity. In 413, Synesius died around the age of 40, leaving behind a trove of essays, hymns, and treatises. In our effort to pay homage to this brilliant thinker, we must at last come to his most intriguing contribution to the spiritual mystery, his work on dreams. In his letter 154 to Hypatia, he explains how his book De Insomniis, on dreams, was ordered and approved by God. Quote, "It was all completed in a single night, or rather in what was left of the night that brought the vision ordering it to be written. There are 2 or 3 places in its argument where I felt I was another person and was joining the company as part of my audience." Synesius claimed his De Insomniis advanced doctrines, quote, "which have not before been the subject of Hellenic philosophy." He begins with his belief that it is an ancient and Platonic practice to conceal more serious philosophy under the guise of a trivial theme, so that sacred knowledge achieved through great difficulty might not be defiled by the profane. He admits that this work is deliberately crafted in this manner, and often refers to prophetic and divine dreams as initiations, and speculates that many myths had their origins in dreams. Prophecy for Synesius is among the best of human pursuits, and he explains it as a result of the inseparable connection of all things in the universe, and likens the sacred signs in nature to different languages which different people may read with their different abilities. The universe feels and breathes as one, and since we are a part of the universe, it does not matter who or where we are. We can partake of that breathing and feeling whole to varying degrees, to the point that we may glimpse the future. Wise humans can learn to spy the kinship of seemingly separate things in the universe, as humans already have in our souls the forms of things yet to pass. The imagination, for instance, has the ability to simulate sensory inputs without those inputs being present to the senses. Synesius describes the imagination as prior to the senses and a, quote, holier form of sense perception. Through the higher capacity of phantasia, we can make contact with the gods who, quote, counsel us, prophesy to us, and otherwise take thought for us. This explains those cases of unliterary persons meeting the muses in their dreams and becoming skillful poets. Incubative dreams show virtue not only through the foregoing of the ego as a prerequisite to the practice, seeing as we must make room for higher intelligence to prophesy to us or present a remedy, but sacred dreams may also lead people to a spiritual ascent who have never before taken this path. Synesius strengthens his points with extracts from the Chaldean oracles, where it is said, quote, to some he gave by teaching a token to grasp the light, others he impregnated with his strength even as they slept. Just as well, Synesius deems, in alignment with the oracles, that divination through entrails and the like are playthings and forbidden, whereas the imagination is naturally present to all human beings and serves as the universal instrument of divination already. In fact, quote, the imaginative pneuma is the most general organ of sense and the first body of the soul. The pneumatic body precedes the physical body and animates and empowers the senses as the primordial sense within us. It is the, quote, first special vehicle of the soul, and can be increasingly etherealized when the soul improves or densified when it clings to the earth. For even if we were to take away our physical senses, the pneuma remains intact, and ever more unconstricted as sleep or ascension frees it from the body, or as we purify our body so that it might retain its harmonious connection to it. The honoring of information derived from physical senses over that of the imagination is therefore backwards. Synesius alludes rather mysteriously to secret rituals whereby the imagination might be purified and admit the god into its awareness. For the imagination can likewise become clouded and unexercised, misused due to physical impurities and mental corruption. Quote, whoever keeps his pneuma pure through a life according to nature has it ready for use, so that in this respect too it is the most widely available of organs. For this pneuma is conscious of the disposition of the soul, and is not in itself incapable of sharing its experience. The divine beings make contact with us through the same active pneuma that roams abroad in our dreams. Quote, the psychic pneuma, which the happy people also call the pneumatic soul, may become a god, a daimon of any kind, and a phantom. It is in this that the soul pays its penalties. Synesius regarded the life after death as one more akin to the dream realm, and this was in accord with the oracles and ancient philosophy. He regarded the second life beyond this preparatory life as that realm where our soul will persist in a realm and around other souls that match ourselves in likeness. Should we continue to carry our downward tendencies after death and dwell in punishment, we may reincarnate into other lives in order to purify ourselves yet again for the ascent. Nonetheless, the soul chose to be born voluntarily into this kind of mortal slavery, whereas its original duty was to fulfill the purposes of universal nature. Quote, the way to discover the status of a soul in a human is as follows. One whose imaginative pneuma is pure and well defined, and receives true impressions of things both in waking visions and in dreams, probably has a promise, so far as the vehicle of his soul is concerned, of a better lot. In this manner, the individual prone to prophecy may interpret this gift as a promise of a greater chance at salvation, whereas those who err in this department indicate a different state of affairs. For those who would dream better must first be virtuous and pure in their imagination, and pray to God, and keep a night journal of the substance of their dreams to train their memory and remain in discourse with the pneumatic world. Quote, "This divination I claim to possess myself and to leave to my children. To practice it, one does not have to pack for a long journey or a voyage to foreign parts. It is enough to wash one's hands, keep a reverent silence, and go to sleep." This is all there is to it. Pray and even ask for a dream, and remain pure and attentive. It is a self-contained, self-initiating mystery, accessible to every human who should purify themselves and take the simplest of steps to build their pneumatic potential. Furthermore, quote, "Its simple do-it-yourself quality is very philosophical. Its unforcedness is pious. Its universal availability, its not needing some water or rock or chasm in the earth to inhabit, is the most divine feature of all." Let us remember Synesius as a philosopher who spoke fire against tyranny, defended his people from foreign invaders, endured through tragic loss to stay true to his beliefs, and till the end of his days found his love in nature and leisure. I close with an extract from his hymn 1, named "Arise, My Soul," where more of Synesius's theurgical Neoplatonism shines through from greater realms beyond the grave. "Happy is he who after his allotted destiny, after troubles, after bitter earthly cares, enters on the pathways of mind, and beholdeth the deep profound that shineth with divine light. It is a labor to take flight with the whole wings of those desires that lift upwards to the universal heart. Do thou only confirm thy flight by such flights as transport to the ideal world, and the Father will appear nigh unto thee, and will hold out his hands to thee. For some shaft of light shall leap forth to illumine thy paths, and will unfold to thee the field of mind, the beginning of beauty. Arise, my soul, drink from the fountain that runs with gold. In worship of the Creator ascend thou, and delay not. Leave to the earth the things of the earth, and in unison with the Father, thou mayest perchance move in harmony with God, thyself divine. Thank you for liking and subscribing. If you would like to support the channel, please consider becoming a member or finding the links below. Be well. Thank you.